For joining us tonight. Before we start the program with Jane Kinney Meyers of the Lobuto Library Partners, I'd like to acknowledge the land that we're on. And these are traditional territories who once called this land home before the arrival of settlers. And I know there are some people from DC and New York um, uh, viewing tonight. For those in New York, the five boroughs of New York City are made up of the traditional homelands of the Lenape, Merrick, Canarsie, Rockaway, Matinacock, and how the Ne Sani. Sorry, I practiced all afternoon, but I still blew that one. Sorry. Uh, they deserve better. It's okay. The District of Columbia shares borders with Maryland and Virginia and connects the land along the Anacostia and Potomac rivers. The people and cultures of the Piscataway, Panuke, Nemaco, Natinikoke, Mataponi, and Homily, and Monacan, and Ponhatan once thrived on this land. Today, both of our cities have populations of indigenous people and offer us opportunities to learn more about their histories and their current cultural practices and their lives. And throughout the United States, there are 574 federally recognized Indian nations, or sometimes called tribes, sometimes called other things, and 63 state recognized tribes in 11 states. We live in a history-driven present. Hopefully, by knowing and remembering history, we can provide services and support policies that help heal the harm from the past, mistakes, and lead to better lives for all. Tonight, our program focuses on libraries in another part of the world, Zimbabwe. Our work as librarians and information professionals and providing services to others requires making formal and informal partnerships to meet many needs in many different environments. Jane Kinney Meyers will present on how the Lobuto Library Partners in Zambia are partnering to help meet community needs through international development. We all are trying to meet community needs, whether it's our own work community, our local community, or uh, other groups we belong to. And as mentioned before, we'll take questions at the end. And so here's Jane Kinney Meyers, who founded the Lobuto Library Partners 16 years ago. Okay.
Do I have this shared all right?
Yes, it looks great, Jane.
I don't know why I'm not seeing the, okay. Put this up here, okay. Hi, you got the name right the second time, Rita, but there's that Zimbabwe and Zambia, those Z words. We're gonna get that straight before you come to Zambia. But
yeah, I'm so sorry. My
mistake. And there is someone out there in the audience who is from Zimbabwe too, so I'm really excited about that. This presentation, there are a number of people who are here who've followed us very closely over a number of years, and others who know nothing about us. And so I'm not trying to, we've been in business for, our last year was our 15th anniversary, and I'm not going to try to give a really comprehensive picture of what we're doing, but rather to kind of tell a story that I think might interest my special libraries colleagues in terms of how we, as how we are essentially special librarians, even though what we are doing is special librarianship, even though it is creating public libraries. And it's really the approach of special librarianship that we have taken that has, I think, allowed us as a tiny NGO to be very successful in getting support. But we are working, instead of working at a university here or for public libraries that are publicly funded or occasionally get grants from either, community foundations or IMLS, for us to do our work, we need to be funded and play a part in the world of international development. So, and the people who are in that world and the institutions in that world, I guarantee you, for the most part, do not get libraries at all. They may have, some of them may, if you're fortunate, have fond memories of a library when they were young, but they sort of don't believe libraries exist if they've been working in developing countries a lot. And they certainly, if they do, they think that it is about literacy, and they put us in this little literacy pillar. And so what we have been working to do all these years is to try to help people in the international development world see what libraries can and what libraries, public libraries these days in this country are doing, and what they can do in support of a lot of development efforts that they're heavily invested in, and people just ignoring the library sector. So I'm going to make the argument today that I make to development people to try to, but also in order to sort of show how I do that. Let's see, okay. I just want to give a quick background about how we approach that in this country of Zambia. And also Labuto, just right off the bat, it is not a place. Labuto is a word in the Bemba language that means light, enlightenment, and knowledge. So in order to work in this arena, we have to be involved in planning at a number of different levels. And of course, like all librarians, we need to be focused on what are the needs of our specific users in the specific communities where we create the libraries. But you really, if you're not operating on all these levels, you are simply not going to get anywhere. So on the international level, many of you who maybe follow IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, may know that, especially in recent years, they have been trying to encourage IFLA members to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that is a very real thing that is taken seriously on the country level as well. I just want to mention, I'm showing pictures of a couple of different IFLAs that I and my staff have been able to attend. And the point of my showing you that is that grants and international development projects paid for our participation in IFLA. That's kind of how the financing in this whole world works. And so this picture on the left is three of us were paid for to participate in IFLA under a grant under funding from PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, because we were showing how libraries can help fight the rising adolescent infection rate of HIV. And they were very interested in us spreading that word around the library world, that librarians, could help their institutions understand how important it is for libraries to get involved in this world. So I think it's something that I hope people sort of take seriously and do look beyond not just their community they serve, but their own borders, and perhaps get interested in the continent of Africa, where there is a tremendous amount of need for assistance in our profession, and working with our colleagues, library colleagues there. In addition to the international arena, then of course, for us, we are working in the country of Zambia right now. That's where we are starting. We do plan to go to other countries, but what we use for a framework, since it is public libraries, are the national development plans of the country, what the U.S. Agency for International Development is aiming to do in the country, because we receive funding from them. And then we have memoranda of understanding with both the government and individual institutions who host our libraries. There's also UN country level policy engagement. And so you're probably all familiar with Unicef, the United Nations Children's Fund. That is one of that is probably the most important United Nations agency whose work is relevant to us. You might think that that would be UNESCO, who traditionally have funded a lot of library work, but I can tell you that having spoken at UNESCO in Paris last January, a year ago, this past January, they really they're really not thinking beyond the Library of Alexandria in terms of work with libraries. They are interested in doing some information literacy work, but they are no longer behind library development the way they used to be in the days when they established national libraries around the world in many cases. Also the UN refugee agencies and the Fund for Population Activities. There are a number of United Nations agencies who do research in the areas that we are trying to address. And that is the primary input from those United Nations agencies. So we are constantly asked the question, what are you doing in Zambia? Why are you there? Why is this needed? Zambia actually has both an undergraduate and a master's program in library studies, library science at the University of Zambia, but they do not teach children's services. So we are filling a gap. And a lot of the organizations, including IFLA and including IFL, if anyone knows that organization, are trying to help librarians in Africa improve their image, improve their services, and improve their support in their countries. But those are almost always focused on adult services. And yet, in Zambia, nearly 70% of Zambians are under the age of 35. And the median age is 17, just over 17. It's the 5th youngest in the world. So essentially, this library profession there and the library schools are simply ignoring 70% of the population. And so that's why we kind of looked around and thought, we need to help here. I'm going to very quickly run through both the problem and some of the solutions we have come up with through these libraries, because I want to get to some more recent information. I just want to show you that, of course, like any development project, you have to identify a problem and set goals for how you are going to, what you're going to do to contribute to alleviating that problem. And I just want to show you the range of problems that we are addressing in Zambia. And again, to go well beyond the stereotype that it's about literacy. HIV/AIDS, a number of things related to breakdowns of government systems, orphaning due to conflict. This is a picture taken not long after the genocide in Rwanda. And just lots and lots of poverty, which has affected millions of African children and youth in various ways and to various degrees in different places of the continent. Many of these young people are isolated from their communities, and many just left on the streets, having been orphaned, especially as a result of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. Or in child-headed households, also as a result of orphaning from HIV/AIDS. Zambia was the country hardest hit by the HIV/AIDS pandemic in terms of orphaning of children ages 14 or under. So there are other countries that had higher numbers of orphans, but as a percentage of the population, Zambia was the hardest hit, which meant they had a huge social problem that needed solutions. And we thought that libraries had an important role to play. The formal education system is closed, and it's a closed system that you're either in or you're out. And so in addressing obvious gender inequity problems, often organizations, at least for a long time, used to offer scholarships only to girls. But those scholarships helping girls then sometimes can displace boys, and that causes other social problems. And formal education, when it is accessible, is often of very poor quality. If you have a country with 70% of the population being considered youth, and you don't have lots and lots of resources to address them, you just are overwhelmed in terms of Zambia and a number of other countries have managed to get a lot of children into school, but you can see perhaps the size of a classroom might indicate the quality of the education they could get. Children with disabilities are often just hidden away and not able to go to school. And children in rural areas especially are very far from needed resources. Gender inequality still exists in Zambia and other countries. Zambia ranks 135th of 152 in the Gender Inequality Index. And violence against children and gender-based violence is really, probably one of the most heartbreaking situations we've encountered. And as you maybe see in the background of this picture, this was a little girl who came to our library for help and received help after her mother caused that injury. So often the girls become impregnated on the streets or through transactional sex, and then again, they are left out of school. And child marriage is a huge problem in that region, certainly in the parts of Zambia that we are working on. And many children suffer these various kinds of traumas and exploitation in isolation without any support by family or society. And so we have thought that the solution to isolation is connection. And that's what we base our approach to the various problems on. So the physical connection in the physical libraries is a very, very important thing. And so again, this is sort of a presentation, not to say these are all of the programs Lobutho Libraries offer, but how we show the development world how libraries can, and in our case do, address some of these development priorities and needs of children and youth. Again, they offer a route to connection and community, and they often open the only door to children and youth to whom every other door is closed. Certainly if you're a street kid in Lusaka, Zambia, a huge city with lots and lots of kids living on the streets, they are not allowed in any other buildings besides ours. They're an inclusive complement to formal education and a cost-effective alternative to rarely existing school libraries. That's why public libraries are important. Again, a library in a school is not accessible to anyone who is not in that school. Libraries also, though, we can work with schools and teachers to improve teaching quality. And educate girls without depriving boys. They can come together in the libraries. We don't have to say you are the elect, and therefore there would be hostility toward you if you were selected for a scholarship. Libraries can support vulnerable and special needs and school children together without stigma. And that's and really, these libraries are among the only places in society where those two worlds ever intersect. Usually children who are living on the street don't have contact to kids who are in school. And they also build community. And that, well, maybe you'll see more of that as we go on later. We can reach the marginalized. And that reach is something that development organizations absolutely treasure, whether they're doing research on children or on vulnerable children, or simply trying to reach them with services or programs. They can do it through our libraries, and they have done it. And that's how we have gotten some of our partnerships that have been very helpful to the development of Lobutho libraries too, and helpful in helping people understand the value of the libraries. They offer teen programming. Again, I mean, all of these things I'm showing are things that libraries can and do in this country. And I guess I'm trying to show the world that they can also do it in African countries. And early childhood education as well. Teach young mothers reading and English. And again, each of these things are things that stakeholders, that government ministries want, that the U.S. Agency for International Development wants, early childhood programming. These various things are things that they put out calls for proposals for development grants, and with no idea in mind that they would ever get a library organization that would apply for them. And I can tell you our PEPFAR grant, out of the 800 applicants, I'm certain we were the only organization that was a library organization that applied. And we were one of 54 people around the world, groups around the world that got those PEPFAR Dreams grants. Yes, and with our English language reading programs for young mothers, we also offer free childcare to their children so that those young mothers can go and learn. The libraries very definitely give youth a voice, and we focus especially on girls in many ways, giving them a voice and confidence. And libraries give young people many other means of expression as well, through programming for the arts, through sign language story times, through drama programs and art programs, and including, of course, rich and accessible print and digital resources. Again, just like libraries here, libraries have the ability to break down gender barriers in many ways and to try to help prevent AIDS with mentoring that helps raise the self-confidence and keep of adolescent girls, and also have been very successful in keeping them in secondary school, which decreases their chance of contracting HIV/AIDS dramatically. We've fought early marriage with coding camps and maker spaces in rural areas, including maker spaces especially adapted to the needs of a rural community. So teaching things like barbering and basket making and weaving, and we've just bought an oil press for making seed oil. And so these activities can help the mothers of these girls at least make enough money so that they don't have to sell their daughters off into a very tragic early marriage, which always results in them not being able to continue in school. So libraries' potential for meeting children's needs really was untapped, we found, and Lobuto's public libraries are there to show the possibilities and measure the impact, measure and communicate the impact. So in big, broad numbers, some of the outcomes and impacts are that we've had in these years, since the first library opened in 2007, more than 1.65 million visits by over 162,000 children and youth. And I will tell you, in terms of development projects, that those are pretty good numbers. We have supported nearly 7,000 marginalized children in acquiring literacy. We've offered technology access and instruction to nearly 14,000 children and youth. We have programs, as I mentioned before, for young mothers and also for deaf children. And we have had these PEPFAR programs that have kept over 1,500 girls in school and free of HIV/AIDS. We provided life-changing mentoring, and the mentoring is a really, really important aspect of many of our programs, to more than 3,500 adolescents. And we've basically created wildly popular libraries where none existed before. So if the number goes from 0 to thousands, that is itself kind of an impact. The most heavily visited of our libraries receives an average of 2,500 visits per week, which is a pretty decent number for any library. And these children, no one has to go to a library. And they come, many children come every chance they get. So, so we over the years built up to that level of popularity and the desire to visit these libraries. Sorry, I'm trying to keep a timer going here, so I don't. And by the way, I know I went through a lot of these things really quickly. I'd be happy to go back to them when we have questions, but I wanted to kind of set the scene for where we are now and addressing this issue of international development. But I do want to say that, you know, kind of the elephant in every room, if you don't mention it, is the COVID-19 pandemic. That certainly hit Zambia perhaps slightly later than in the United States, and is still an active concern. We had to, like they keep saying about libraries here, pivot. We had to adapt in different ways. So adapting from what? This was March 13th. Sorry, I didn't get the, you can't read that heading. This was a presentation I did for USAID's education office, who wanted to know how we were adapting to the coronavirus. So March 13th, 2020, we had this event along with the Embassy of Sweden to celebrate Pippi Longstocking's 75th anniversary, I think. And since our organization has been nominated 12 times for the Astrid Lindgren Award, if those of you who know Astrid Lindgren and the Pippi Longstocking books, you'll know why we have a particular affinity and why the Swedish Embassy has a particular affinity for us. But you can see lots and lots of kids come to all of these events that we have, and no one's forced to come. They really love it. So the library buildings had to close 5 days later. The government said, okay, suddenly 2 cabinet ministers died of COVID, and they suddenly realized, wait a minute, we have to do something here. So we could no longer have children obviously come into our library buildings, but we do have these libraries that, as you can see, have large outdoor spaces by design. It's very deliberately by design. So at least in the initial, for the first month or so, we adapted our programs for use in the outdoor spaces. So this is a spaced story time, but all of our staff had to begin working from home, from their homes, the staff that worked in our offices as opposed to in the libraries. So we had to give everybody, you know, access to the internet at their homes, because you cannot expect that for a staff in Zambia, that they would have that. So this was, and we had to provide safe transport, because almost all of our staff came to and from the office using little buses that were certainly no longer safe. And we had to give them masks and brief them on safety and getting involved in reporting networks in the city. We joined local community response groups and mapping efforts in Lusaka as well to contribute what we could from our end. Now, an interesting thing that the people from USAID thought it was kind of funny, that one thing libraries could do during this time when we couldn't have kids come in the buildings is we could focus on a lot of collection and systems management that's best done without patrons present. And if you have 2,500 kids running around your library in a week, it's very difficult to do an inventory and to focus on updates to our library catalog and our library portal. And we also took a lot of digital resources and video resources that we had already and tried to highlight them more on our website for those very small percentage, actually, of the young people in Zambia who could access digital resources. But we certainly had some of them, and we tried to make them as accessible as possible. And we also had new staff that we could focus on training during this period too. But we also immediately, while children could still come to the library, we knew we also had to focus on helping them know how to be safe. This was a very frightening thing, and good information was not easily available. So we started to focus on trying to teach them to wash their hands and do social distancing. And we actually have a couple of really, really wonderful films that that our staff made of songs and dances about how to stay safe in coronavirus. And we did it the way we always do it, which is the children themselves help make up the songs, and they are so talented. But I'm sorry I can't show you one of these now. They are on our YouTube channel. If you just look for the Labuto Library YouTube channel, there's some really cool things there that showed what our staff did. The drama and mentoring continued with small groups. And down in our rural library in the Southern Province, we were able to continue our Girls Leading Our World Club. And they themselves developed their own song called Let's Fight Corona. There's a little film about that. Our art program continued outdoors, and with the art teacher inviting children to express their emotions and reactions to the changes around them. And the library staff and children also created some new digital and video resources. The films that I mentioned, and also taking books that were written about explaining coronavirus, and we created translations in Zambian languages, just sort of very simply using PowerPoint and then turning them into a film so that they could see these little books in their language, and we could show them at the libraries. And the program facilitators maintained relationships with the kids who did not have internet access, obviously, through WhatsApp groups and text messages. So, you know, we've spent, like everyone, we've spent over a year now sort of in this situation and trying to see how we can adapt in a place that does not, where people do not have a lot of abilities to access digital resources. We couldn't just sort of put our internet out in the parking lot and have people drive up in their car, come up and try to access the internet that way, because they probably wouldn't have the devices in order to do that, et cetera. So, but we also saw how dedicated our staff was, how the staff was, we were hearing over and over that the children could not wait and still cannot wait to come swarming back to their library. But we noticed that the people who work in the libraries, the feeling was completely mutual. And I think what we have learned from this is that since what really takes place with the art program where children are expressing their feelings, that's a kind of mentoring. What we do with children's books in the libraries is a kind of mentoring. Of course, you know, if any of you have been children's librarians or have children who have been in these situations of going to story times at libraries, you always discuss what are the ideas behind these books. And they always are about values and mentoring and different. So even that part of that very traditional part of what we do as libraries is a kind of mentoring. And then we have just very specific mentoring programs too. And so we've kind of become to understand the whole universe of what we have to offer as various kinds of mentoring. That is what seems to have the most enduring impact on the children that come to our libraries, of course, along with the community. So to get on to something maybe less heartwarming, but I think perhaps interesting in terms of people themselves thinking about finding funding for initiatives in their libraries outside of the normal places. I just recently, today actually, I just received something from the Foundation Center that was talking a lot about funding for libraries in the United States. And of course, we all know IMLS is a big funder, but it also showed that particularly for public libraries, there are a lot of community foundations that provide grants. They're usually pretty small. We need grants that really cover our operations in a bigger way. So anyway, this might give you some ideas for your own situation, or at least give you an idea of how libraries play a role in international development. And this is exactly the kind of slide you're never supposed to have, and I don't ever have slides that are full of words like this, but I want to show that in order to do this, in order to get funding from an international development agency, you have to, just like you do with funding from any foundation, I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with that, is that you have to have objectives for what you do. And we do have pretty well-defined objectives for what we are doing as an organization and what our model is. And I think just an important thing about our model, which is something that has evolved and developed through the years, it's not exactly the same by any means as it was when we started out in 2005, but one fundamental aspect of our libraries, of our model, is that we do not own the libraries that we create. We create them, but they are owned by community-based organizations that provide the ongoing operations and are committed to the ongoing staffing and operations of their library. We keep a relationship with them, we train their staff, and we, et cetera. But for the most part, there are two exceptions that I'll mention at the end. But okay. So as we started out in this work, I mean, we built our first library with a lot of donations from actually a lot of small donations and some large donations from colleagues in the library world and also in the children's book world that we were involved in. But then we got our first real sort of development grant, a small one, from EIFEL, which some of you may be familiar with. I won't go into detail about all of these, but then our next grant that drew from that and sort of gave a 10-to-1 return on the investment of a $30,000 grant from EIFEL, where we began creating computer-based lessons to teach children to read in 7 Zambian languages. We took that as a prototype and proposed to this All Children Reading Grand Challenge grant was funded by USAID, World Vision, and Australia Aid to expand those lessons, to improve them and make them accessible around the country. And that was a $300,000 grant over the space of 2 years. We were not able to finish that project in the time of the grant, but I can give more information on that later if you're interested. The other mention here about Dow Jones is that Dow Jones and Company provided the funds for construction of our second library. And that was something very directly related to our involvement with and support from the Special Libraries Association. Those of you who have been around SLA for longer than just the last few years, I think will remember Dow Jones and Company being a really central sponsor of the Special Libraries Association. And Ann Caputo, formerly of Dow Jones and Company, is on our advisory board. And I think we were also joined by Brian DeMarkey, who had his time there as well. And Claire Hart from Dow Jones and Company, formerly from Dow Jones and Company, is on our advisory board as well. And again, you know, it was just a matter of our colleagues getting behind this and then talking to their organizations about supporting it. So that's why, another reason why special librarians really rock. And the people involved in international education were very interested to hear about that, because they're always looking for private sector funding of education projects. And when they heard, wait a minute, these librarians kind of conspire together to get their organizations to support this, they were really impressed with that. Not so much impressed with us, but with this whole world of special librarians who care about the world. Anyway, so USAID has a program called American Schools and Hospitals Abroad, who are the ones who they only fund construction and renovation of buildings and purchase of durable commodities. So after our first three libraries, they have become the funders of our subsequent libraries that we have created for constructing and also purchasing an entire book collection, which is really the only way to build a really good and focused collection of books, and all the technology going into the libraries, all of those durable commodities, film projectors and various things that we are then able to provide to the host organization along with the training. Early funders also were Comic Relief in the UK, the Open Society Initiative of Southern Africa. I mentioned the PEPFAR project, that the DREAMS project that was really focusing on HIV/AIDS. Our current grants that are active right now, we have one that followed on from our PEPFAR grant from VIIV Healthcare, their Positive Action for Children's Fund, which again relates to preventing early marriage and HIV/AIDS. The Motorola Solutions Foundation, we had one grant from them. We have just gotten our application, our invitation for a full application for a new grant from them that's due in another week or so. So we're always writing and applying for grants as well. And that's focusing on our coding camps and our teaching of coding and digital literacy and various skills related to and coming from coding. The Templeton Foundation is kind of an outlier and not normally a funder in the world of international development, but I don't know if you've ever heard of them. In their case, what they are funding for us is research on our mentoring, and its focus on developing character traits that they are very interested in seeing. They were very interested in our holistic approach to children. And we are trying to measure the extent to which that mentoring and strengthening character strengths also makes more effective their USAID stepping stone curriculum for trying to prevent HIV/AIDS and for focused on sexual and reproductive health. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We don't know what the outcome of the research will be, but that's going on now in partnership with American University's psychology department here, and who are conducting research. There's another foundation called Elma Philanthropies that we've received some of these grants we receive regionally, like the Motorola one, Elma, and VIV. Those grants go directly to our office in Zambia, and they tend to be smaller, but they do in many cases fund a large part of our operations. Also, we have a second U.S. Embassy grant, Zambia U.S. Embassy grant focused on follow-up with PEPFAR. And we continue to have pretty good success with getting grants from American hospitals, and schools and hospitals abroad. Okay, so our strategies for future funding include a focus on funding from ASHA, American Schools and Hospitals Abroad, for one model urban library and turning our first rural library into what we are calling a model library. And in both of those cases, they are libraries that we have that do not have another host organization. So for various reasons. And so our strategy has evolved to have a different focus and use those as sort of training centers and models for other libraries. We have a plan to go to Lilongwe, Malawi at some point. We're talking to the U.S. Embassy about having what they call an American Corner at our rural library. And okay, there's my alarm. And we're working with other programs focused on development. The UNHCR asked us to bring this model to some refugee camps. This is the last part. So I see, Rita, I hope you're all not getting upset with the length of time this has taken. I think we can get through this very quickly and get to questions, okay? So our first library opened in 2007. That was our proof of concept. It was the Fountain of Hope Library. It was hosted at a drop-in center for street children that I was involved with very heavily in the years that I lived in Zambia from 1998 to 2001. And you'll see that this has both a birth and death date. That library was there for 10 years. After 10 years, in that 10-year period, the host organization was never able to themselves have the funding to sustainably support the library. They also made some decisions to do some things that went counter to our our memorandum of understanding with them and had some child protection implications, et cetera. And we had to make the very difficult decision to kind of decommission that library. The second library that opened in 2010 is the one that Dow Jones and Company, along with Oprah's Angel Network, have provided some funding for the construction. And this is built on land provided by the Ministry of Education. And so that very importantly explains why we don't have a host organization for that. The Ministry of Education is not and cannot be a host. If for no other reason, American Schools and Hospitals Abroad will not fund construction on land or in a situation that is controlled by a foreign government. But I can go into more detail about that later if anyone's interested. And then our third library was our first rural library in the southern province. And its host organization was called the Matantala Rural Integrated Development Enterprise. And it was funded by Comic Relief in the UK and the Open Society Initiative of Southern Africa. What Matantala was bringing together 3 chieftaincies, traditional authorities. And it was the first time ever a development project, probably the last time too, in Zambia was funded not through government, but through traditional leaders. And so Matantala stopped existing, but the owners of that library now are those traditional leaders. And I'll tell you how that has evolved to our most recent strategy. Then we began getting these grants from American Schools and Hospitals Abroad. So the first ASHA funded one was opened in 2017, hosted by this very, very solid and sustainable organization. We really basically finished the construction of the next library, also in the southern province, but further down in the provincial capital of Choma. But it hasn't opened yet because of the coronavirus. We really want the US Embassy to be there and other stakeholders, but right now it's not safe to plan an opening event. But also we have the collection for that library that was shipped to Zambia for us by World Vision. It is still sitting in our office because we haven't been able to, they need to send their staff up to Lusaka for training. And again, it just hasn't been a safe opportunity to do that. So that library is opening as soon as the country opens up a little more. And I think it will be very soon. We're going to be conducting the training in another week or 2. And now we have under construction another library hosted in a peri-urban area of Lusaka, hosted by the St. Daniel Comboni Missionary Sisters. And this library has some new features. This one photographed in the top that's being built is an early learning center that we developed, that each of these little stations are different places, and it's open to the public so that parents and so that the public can understand better that literacy is brought about starting with a baby from day 1 in helping all of that cognitive development through play and different activities. So back to our second library in Lusaka, the Ngwerere Library has been rebranded as the Labuto Model American Youth Library Center because of this funding from American Schools and Hospitals Abroad, but that it doesn't have to be called the American Youth Library Center for Training and Administration. And this actually represents 2 grants. One we had for further development of this library to include a teen center and the early learning center. And then also we're moving our offices over to the space of this library where we'll be able to continue to do training and administration for the whole library system and network. And there's a community center and a bunch of other things for collecting and reporting data, et cetera. And then we very, very recently made the decision that the library in Nabakuyu will be our Mamuni model rural library for young people. And although I can't say that we have gotten that funding yet from American Schools and Hospitals Abroad, I mean, literally, we just put in that proposal at the beginning of this week. Monday, I did it. And, but it is going to be, but we feel very optimistic about this. This is the last slide, Rita and Clara. But I want to say it's going to be very interesting and a new experience for American schools and hospitals abroad, because the hosts of this library are traditional leaders. They're headmen and chiefs of these different chieftaincies, the Balea royal clan and the Chona chieftaincy, or the Bakonko royal clan. Even when that library opened in 2014, there were all these headmen and chief, and I kind of had to go and kneel down in front of some of them. And they have, what is really interesting about this is that we had to get proof that we can build on this land, and for at least 20 years. And so we went to the headman who's the headman of the area. The chief said he's the one that needs to issue this traditional landholding certificate. Just very quickly, since independence, individuals and businesses have been buying traditional lands from the chieftaincies throughout the country all the time in order to build a house, to start a business, to create a farm. And so these chieftains are used to people coming to them for that purpose. And they basically realize that they're selling their land right, their rights to this land, but they need this money in order to support themselves, because there is no good way to support the traditional authorities in contemporary times. But when we went and asked them for this, we have no intention whatsoever of buying the land at all from them. And so they knew we certainly weren't offering money, but they very, very happily gave us this, because they have been involved since day one in that library and what it supports, with our skills-based makerspace, with our early literacy center, getting mothers to make books and toys and things. And we have worked with them in fighting early marriage. We set up a gender-based violence secretariat comprised of these different headmen, and they meet at the library. So we are so much a part of their community that they were simply saying, yes, of course, we want you to be able to do this. So I'm really kind of proud of that, because that is something you never find. You're never going to find a development agency who is going to necessarily want to do something like this, enduring like this, on land of traditional authorities, and work with them in that way as their bosses, which they are to us. So a little over time, I think, but.
Well, that's okay, Jane. There are a couple of questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. It's just fascinating. I'm always impressed with the amount of energy you have and enthusiasm. And I know many other, the staff sounds incredibly involved. And the two questions, one of them did involve the staff, like how many, the basic question is, how many staff are there with the loop in place in Zambia now? And did they need additional projects or library management training to manage during the COVID? And okay. And did you get help from partners on operational management or just funding?
It's not so much management, but operations. We did get some help, some additional help during the COVID period from some of our people who had been otherwise funding us. The Elma Philanthropies was one who just said, okay, here, we'll give you this amount. And then they came back a little later and said, I bet you can use some more money, here's this. Because, any really good funder is looking at the world and saying, well, we don't want this to shrivel up and die during COVID. they recognized that that was needed. In our entire organization, I think we have right now probably 21 people on staff. So there's myself and one other person here in Washington, DC. The rest are in Zambia. But as I mentioned, those are people who actually work directly for Labuto. A lot of the people who work in the libraries, like the people who work in the Mtunzi library, that staff, they're employees of the Mtunzi Center. The staff from Choma, the Choma library, are on the payroll of the people who sponsor that, and as will be the Comboni Library. And that is our model going forward. But we do support the staffs of the two model libraries because they don't have another host organization. And they not only didn't need any special, I'm not sure what if I got that right. I didn't see the question in writing, but not so much management training as, I mean, they've been managing these libraries, especially our library in Lusaka, Bessa, Given Bessa, who was in one of those pictures at an IFLA with us some years ago, is a spectacular library manager, and managing the transition to what all of the staff is doing, either from home or in different circumstances from during COVID-19 was no sweat to her at all. There's other staff that work centrally in our office. We obviously have a finance manager, and we've hired a new HR person, and that was something we did during COVID. And we have a new collection development person who I've been working with a lot. And my work schedule and pattern and commute hasn't changed much at all from COVID, because you can see this is my office, which is in the third floor of my house, always has been. We've been using Zoom since long before COVID. And so with Zoom and WhatsApp, I'm communicating with them. The only difference is I can't travel to Zambia, as I used to spend about a month out of every year there. And for the last couple of years now, I haven't been able to do that. But no, there was no additional management training, I don't think, necessarily focused on COVID, if I got that question right. But ongoing training is always needed for our staff, and I guess this is a great time to offer that, because if there may be people who might want to get involved in this at a distance. As our model library in Lusaka, the rural model, the Labuto Model Library is supposed to be a training center, but COVID has helped us realize that we really need to focus on distance training more. And so under our ASHA grant, we do have funds to purchase a lot of good communications equipment and build this community center, which can be a training center. And we particularly, because what our staff needs to learn about is library services to children and youth. We also really need to help them, and pretty much every other librarian in Zambia, even understand what good children's literature is. So I'm going to be looking for a lot of really enthusiastic children's librarians to take a look at our catalog and talk with me about it, and talk with our library staffs at the various libraries about these various books and why they're of interest and how to present them in ways that children's librarians know how to do. So I guess it really isn't so much a management issue as a children's services issue. That training is an ongoing need.
Okay. Well, actually, one of the questions was, what assistance are we able to provide currently? I think that means, well, I think the projects you just mentioned, or is there anything else that we're a pretty talented group here? Maybe some people might be interested, or what?
We
Or should they contact you if with that, or?
Sure. I mean, if there would happen to be anyone with either any personal interest or professional interest whatsoever in anything related to children's services, of course, that would be great. And that's kind of an obvious one. or if you have any friends or colleagues that would be interested in that. That's the other great things that our very talented colleagues can do, is to network and spread the word in that way. We are trying to grow our board right now, but that, we have some very specific needs for that, and that's not necessarily something everyone is in a position or would want to jump into. But the purpose of our board of directors is to obtain the resources we need. And although I've talked about all of these development grants, that earlier question, or something that you offered, or a way you phrased it, Rita, sort of put a finger on the fact that what we really, really need is unrestricted funding to cover our operations. We very desperately need that. And so one way, one standard way that nonprofits do that is by having fundraising events or various kinds of fundraising. And we had an event that our first digital event in last year. And the board very much wants to do another one this year, but we do not have the capacity to pull that off. It just so happens. So if anyone would want to volunteer to assist with, we could do what we did last year, which is get Zoom webinar, and we could have an event that way, or perhaps even just very simply the way you're doing it here at Zoom meetings. But that is another way that people could help, is sort of spreading the word. If anyone, and part of the word we want to spread is that a lot of people that have supported us over the years have done it very, very modestly, $10 a month from their bank account, or even $10 quarterly, or whatever. People can become a recurring donor in painless ways, but also, any kind of assistance with digital skills. We are going to pretty soon have 2 whole collections that need to be cataloged, but they're all going to be in Zambia. So I haven't figured out the way to get people to be able to help with that. But if anyone is interested, maybe I can try to find out or try to figure that out with them. Like you said, if people contact me and they have specific things in mind that they can do really well.
Okay.
Maybe some of the things they've seen here would inspire them to.
Okay, there's just a couple other questions. Do you do all the grant proposals, or does someone help you with that? Or
Well, we have one board member that is is a professional,
I see.
but she hasn't actually had the time, especially since COVID. She actually, our biggest grants and our most successful grants actually have been written by me and colleagues. We had a young American librarian who worked with us in Zambia for 5 years, Elizabeth Giles, who is a children's librarian, and she's back in the United States now working at Kansas City Public Library as a children's librarian. But she was very, very good at writing, and she sort of helped with the proposals. But yep, most of them, especially the ASHA ones, fall in this household, not just by myself, but I have to mention that my husband is really, really good at helping ASHA understand why they should support us.
That's great. Okay, and let's see, how does Labuto define child is another question. Are there any services focused on young adults and adults?
Well, we don't define child for the world.
Okay. Yeah.
We certainly serve human beings from the age of 0 through at least the mid-20s. We
Okay.
don't tell someone who's 27 or 35 or whatever, no, please don't come in here, especially if they want to bring their children in here, etc. But we go by, there are official definitions of childhood. Unicef has its particular definition, and I think that's where That's the one that maybe does go up to 35. USAID has a definition. Every one of these stakeholders really do have particular definitions. There's an awful lot of interest right now in supporting young adults in creating livelihoods.
Okay.
And so a lot of what we're doing with maker spaces, also in our urban library, but in the rural libraries, does address, is targeted to young adults.
Okay. And one last question is, someone was wondering, does Zambia have a higher rate of COVID-19 due to the lack of internet access and difficulty of doing things virtually? I don't know if you would want to venture an
Well,
opinion on that, or
I haven't ever read, I mean, I've certainly read a lot about COVID in Zambia and in other African countries. The whole world is looking, the whole international development world is looking frantically at that. I've never seen anyone, I mean, people have understood that this was a big wake-up call in terms of education, what it does for education. I mean, we have talked about, serving children who are in school and out of school, and particularly focusing on those who are out of school, and then suddenly everyone was out of school. And so, but I haven't really seen anything ascribe the spread of COVID to the lack of internet access. I don't know that the spread of COVID has been prevented in the United States by having internet access, so much as the focus seems to be far more on trying to continue education. And, but maybe I don't understand that question correctly.
Someone just commented the problem now is more lack of vaccine, I think. So,
right now,
yeah.
that's the concern right now.
Yeah.
But maybe whoever asked that question, if any of these questions, if I didn't answer them, maybe whoever asked could just unmute themselves and ask or whatever.
Yeah. Well, actually, if, there have been many people who have complimented you on your work, and that they found the program interesting. So thank you so much. And if people do want to make other comments, please, we've got some time. Jane has time to for any comments anyone has.
Okay. Actually, I have to go. So, but I want to say something.
Okay. This is Logan. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, my name is Logan Tapscott. I am the programming chair at DC SLA. This was a very good talk, so thank you, Jane and Rita.
Thank you.
And Claire for help organizing it. We have some upcoming events through DCSLA. There is recently added, we have a lecture about sustainability design, sustainability, there we go, and is featuring, the design will be focusing actually on the recently renovated MLK Public Library. That's on April 22nd at 2 p.m. There's a Info Bites on April 26th. I believe it's on noon. It'll focus on articles. Discussion will talk about the impact of COVID-19 on publishing. And DCSLA is actually organizing a speed mentoring event, and we are looking for some mentors. We have tentatively scheduled on the 15th. Information will be coming soon, I promise. It's been very hectic. So if you're interested, I'm going to put my email down. There we go. It's on the chat. If you're interested in volunteering, I promise I'll give you a date, a time. The date is still on the 15th. We still need to figure out the time. So if you're interested in volunteering as a mentor, please email me. If you're interested in just being participant, information will be provided very soon how to register. So thank you so much. I do have to go. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much for your help, Logan, and very nice to meet you. Hope you're, bye. Okay, Clara, did you,
Sure.
Yeah.
First, I want to thank you both, Rita, for not for the first time keeping Mabuto in your mind for the chapter, but Jane, for your wonderful work and really explaining all of the things, the steps it takes to make a program like this run and continue to be successful for year after year for the last 16 years. As Logan said, there's some upcoming events for DC and New York. You can find them on the individual chapters' upcoming events. There's a virtual walking tour in observation of Earth Day in April that's coming up next, and we have a virtual tour of the La Mama archives. So fun stuff in theater, but keep an eye on the website. That will be the best place for it, as well as the other channels we have to communicate with you. I want to be mindful of everybody's time, but Rita, if you want to take it back over to see if there's any closing thoughts Jane might have.
do you have any closing thoughts? Thank you so much. And I wanted to say Happy National Library Week to everyone, and International Special Librarian Day is the 16th. So if no one else does it, please give yourself a pat on your back. And it's been a wonderful community, I think, to be involved in as I recently retired. But please, Jane, if you would like to make a closing comment.
I just want to say again, actually, that we have plans. Rita has plans to come to Zambia now that she is retired from college, and she has been such a wonderful supporter and spreader of support for us through the New York SLA chapter. So I've been very, very grateful for support we've gotten over the years from SLA New York, as well as, of course, SLA DC. And yeah, so pat yourselves all on the back.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And we can keep in touch and enjoy the rest of the week. And okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.